Hey you guys, doing another Tomes of Terror book review. Sorry I haven't been doing as many of these lately, but any of you guys that have been around for a long time know that, I actually ended up having to get a full-time job, so I don't have as much time to read books, and I also don't have as much time to make videos about them either, but I am going to try and, keep up with them and maybe at least do, one a month or more if I can manage it. So this book right here, now I'm a graphic designer by trade, have been for about a quarter century at this point because I'm old as shit. So maybe, I don't know. So maybe it's like a little self-serving of me to say that book covers are really important, you guys. Just because I'm biased in that regard, because like I said, I'm a graphic designer, that doesn't mean that the statement isn't absolutely true. For example, the book that I'm talking about today, the 2020 novel The House That Fell from the Sky by Patrick Delaney. It was actually the cover design that was a significant component in why I particularly chose to read it, like while I was scrolling through all the Kindle Unlimited options. Now, I'll admit the intriguing title, The House That Fell from the Sky, that's a great title. That kind of like hooked me into, but the cover design is chef's kiss. It's really good. The designer, by the way, is named Ross Nischler. I'm not really sure how you pronounce his last name, so I apologize for that. But I definitely wanted to give him a shout out because I really like the cover of this. It's dynamite. Now, I am going to say that even though I feel like the story within the covers didn't quite live up to the awesomeness of the exterior package, but it was still a pretty solidly entertaining read for people who are maybe into haunted house stories, but that have kind of a cosmic horror twist to them. So The House That Fell from the Sky, it revolves around four friends who I think are kind of all in their late 20s, early 30s type of age bracket. Now, at times, the dialogue between them kind of sounds more like discussions had by teenagers, perhaps. This isn't necessarily a criticism, by the way. I'm 50 years old and I still have conversations like this because, I'm kind of immature and I'm not really ashamed of that fact. I did see that some reviewers say that the book read like a YA. I don't really concur with that assessment overall. It is a pretty easy, kind of breezy read with wisecracking characters who are constantly snarking at one another. But that was a big thing that I saw a lot of people mentioned in their reviews, that they thought the characters came across more like teenagers than people in their late 20s. Like I said, that didn't bother me, but I'm just saying that that's something that a lot of people notice. So if that's going to bother you, then maybe the characters will bother you in this novel as well. So our main protagonist is Scarlett Van Tassel. She is a somewhat successful, I kind of feel like, horror YouTuber. She talks about horror and reviews horror movies and stuff like that. It's, kind of like what I do. But she has found herself kind of, I guess, sort of adrift in life at 29 years of age. Now, she grew up in this city called Winterview, but I guess she always sort of had bigger aspirations. She always dreamed of bigger and better things. Now, at some point, a few years prior to the events of the novel, she actually ran off with this guy that she met. She didn't really run off with him, but they started a relationship, and then she went to another town with him. His name was Luke, and he was supposedly the big love of her life and everything, and she started college and did all this other stuff. But not too long after that, I guess that both her and Luke sort of realized, and I think Luke realized it before she did, that Scarlett was kind of only doing what she thought she was supposed to be doing, in regards to adulting, and she was constantly, subsuming her own identity to Luke's, I guess. In a way, it's he's did you really want to come to this town? Did you really want to go to college and do this, that, and the other? You're not really doing what you want to do, and you're kind of losing the person that I fell in love with, because now you're just doing what I want to do, and he didn't really want to be responsible for that. So he actually kind of gently breaks it off with her. He's you need to go back to being you instead of just an adjunct to me, you know what I mean? Which, that was pretty cool of him to do. But she didn't really think so at the time, but she did kind of realize it later on. So after they break up, she kind of goes back to her hometown, with her tail between her legs a little bit, and she moves back in with her dad. Now, she's also been contemplating ending her YouTube channel, even though she apparently has, like, you know, millions of fans. And it used to be something she really quite enjoyed. But at the beginning, she just feels like at a loss and she doesn't really know what to do with her life. So she's just kind of like, I'm going to make a video and tell everybody that I'm quitting or whatever. Now, also factoring into the plot is Scarlett's brother, Tommy, who seems about the same age, you know, roughly. Now, he was actually an aspiring professional baseball player, like he was going to be in the MLB and everything like that. And he had to end up foregoing his dreams after, like, this injury ended his sports career, which factors into the plot, like, later on. You also have Tommy's girlfriend and Scarlett's former best friend, whose name is Hanna, and she's actually been having a really, really hard time dealing with the fairly recent death of her mother, whose name was Eve. And then there's also Jackson, who is a bartender and Scarlett's close friend. Now, he's sort of contending with a very, very strained relationship with his father, who I think is like the Winterview chief of police or something like that. And he's a real hard-ass type, like, you know, nothing that Jackson ever does is good enough. And, you know, there just seems like no love lost there. He also seems to have, like, some unrequited romantic feelings for Scarlett, which she doesn't seem to be all that aware of because she kind of just sees him as more of like a buddy. So all three of these other characters also harbor, I don't want to lean too hard into this, but they kind of harbor maybe like differing levels of resentment towards Scarlett for like taking off with Luke, like this random dude, without really saying goodbye to like her friends that she's known forever. Hannah's feelings of abandonment, I feel like, are, you know, very easily the most pronounced because she feels like Scarlett threw away like this lifelong friendship for just some rando and was, you know, hence not there to help her through her grief like after her mother died. Now, once Scarlett comes back into town, like at the beginning of the book, though, it seems like the four of them still kind of like hang out and try to resolve their differences, but they do kind of like snipe at one another about these sort of simmering resentments. Now, what about this house that fell from the sky of the title, you might be asking? Well, we'll get to that. Although I will warn you that even though a house does indeed fall from the sky, as the title promises, you know, fairly early on in the story, it then kind of like simmers on the back burner for like a really long time while a bunch of this character stuff plays out, like these relationship kind of things. How you feel about that is kind of like up to you, but it was by far the main criticism that I saw in other reviews of this novel, other than the characters seem like teenagers, but that, you know, some people didn't really care about that. But the main criticism I saw in other reviews was that it took too long to get into the actual house. And yeah, I do admit that to an extent, I agree with that. This is a long-ass book. It's about 528 pages, at least the Kindle version, which is what I read. And I think that the thing was more than half over before the heroes even set foot in the house. So just know going in that this is essentially like a character study, or is like more about the relationships between the four core characters for the first 250, 300 pages, something like that, with just the promise of this house kind of lurking around in the background. So, as I mentioned, not too long into the story, the titular house actually does come crashing down, just randomly, in the middle of downtown Winterview one day, and everyone is completely and understandably quite baffled by this development. The house looks all kind of like gothic and spooky. It's a big like mansion kind of thing. It's very spooky looking, and it soon becomes clear that something about it is, let's call it otherworldly, okay? Now, the authorities, they kind of rope it off after trying and failing to get inside, but on the handful of occasions that someone does manage to get into the house or get past the house's defenses, I guess, there's actually like a rival horror YouTuber guy that is trying to get in there for his channel, and like a rookie cop who gets in there. They basically kind of like go insane and kill themselves, like basically within seconds of emerging from the house. So the house actually becomes kind of like a worldwide media sensation, which obviously it would in real life. And it subsequently gets purchased by this kind of shady conglomerate known as the Crow Corporation. Now, after all of this stuff happens, and like there's a big media hype and everything like that, which like I said is kind of in the background or like on the fringes of the main story with the four characters, actually a year in Winterview goes by, and the house is pretty much reduced to, like I said, kind of like background noise. Like the main characters sort of talk about it every now and then, of course, and, you know, because it's kind of a big thing in their town, and there's concern that Hanna in particular might be becoming really obsessed with it. But overall, Scarlett, Tommy, and Jackson are just kind of going about their regular, somewhat dead-end lives, having conversations about the house sometimes, but mainly about other things and about their past and stuff like that. But then, the Crow Corporation, which that is one minor criticism, is I kind of wish more had been gone into about the Crow Corporation. You don't really find out hardly anything about them. And I don't know if he's planning on, like, another book, like, where he's going to go more into that or anything. But, that's just, like, a minor little quibble, and I just thought I would mention it. But at some point, like, the Crow Corporation announces kind of like a Willy Wonka style contest, and it's like this lottery where they send out tickets to everybody in Winterview. So the lucky people whose numbers get drawn will be allowed to enter the house on Halloween night if they can survive, and if they can survive the entire night there and come out unscathed, which so far has not happened, they will receive $1 million each in prize money. Now, obviously, everyone kind of wants to do it, but kind of not, because the house also seems to have, like, a little bit of, like, bad energy, bad mojo that kind of, like, leaks out. Like, so the nearer you are to the house, like, the more kind of fucked up you feel. And, people that have been in there, like I said, they either, like, they committed suicide or they went insane or whatever. So it will probably not surprise anyone, since they are reading this book, that our 4 protagonists are the ones who end up going in. Now, the way this ends up happening is a little bit convoluted, because Hanna, whose mother actually left her a considerable fortune, like, buying a big fucking mansion that is kind of, like, empty. She just, like, lives in there and grieves kind of thing. She essentially buys her way into the house because she's convinced that her dead mother's spirit, I guess, is, like, waiting for her in there. Like I said, she's kind of become obsessed with it. After this development, the other 3 kind of feel obligated to go with her because, she's their best friend, and they just want to make sure that she's going to be okay and that, like, nothing terrible is going to happen, because they try to, like, convince her not to, because they're like, you're going to die in there pretty much, but she is absolutely dead set. So they're like, well, then we have to go with her, obviously. So that's the thing. It's like by this time, pretty much everybody is damn sure that the house probably came from some other dimension and is, almost certainly bad news for anybody that goes in there. And they're probably not going to come out alive or sane. So at a little past the halfway mark of the novel, I feel like, our main characters, along with a 5th character, who's kind of like this elusive magician whose name is Vincent Veladex. He's another character that I wish had been in the story more. Like, he's kind of mentioned in the first part of it, like, oh, he was this famous magician, like the most famous guy, like, from this town or whatever, and he, like, disappeared, you know what I mean? But then he kind of, like, pops back up, and, some people thought the house was, like, a trick that he was doing, like, to, it was, like, this whole thing. But I kind of wish, like, he was hardly in it, like, he was just mentioned in the first part, but then he shows up, and he's one of the ones that's going to go into the house with them. Once they go into the house, pretty much all Lovecraftian hell breaks loose. Now, we never really learn much about the house's history, other than just kind of like a few very rudimentary details, and we never really grasp fully, like, what the house is exactly. Like I said, it's very much a cosmic horror type of situation. But I will say that kind of the saga of the 4 of them, or the 5 of them rather, like, inside the house is pretty cool regardless. So there's, like, lots of trippy descriptions of eldritch horrors and so forth, as the house it essentially seems to be, like, trying to break the minds of everybody that enters it. So there are also a lot of flashbacks in this part of the book as well, as the characters, like, become separated and they sort of, like, fall foul of the house's, charms, I guess, or, like, what it's trying to do. Like, it's trying to drive them insane, like, showing them horrible things. And I will say that although some of the flashbacks, are relevant to, like, what's happening, particularly how they ended up meeting Vincent Veladex, like, the magician, and, like, how he factors in, and things like that, and how Tommy, hurt his arm and stuff. Some of it, not so much. They're interesting, but some of them don't really factor into the plot all that much. So I do kind of wish that the novel had been trimmed for length just a tad, because some of the background character stuff doesn't really factor that much into the larger plot. Like I said, it's interesting, it's all character background stuff, but I feel like it would have been, better if some of it had been trimmed out, because it didn't seem like it was all that important. That said, though, the characters are actually like pretty well drawn, and I admit that I did become like really emotionally invested in their fate. So like when bad shit happened to them, like I did get upset and things like that. So that's good. Like that's a sign that I did actually like care about the characters. But in spite of that, I did kind of wish that the balance of the story had kind of been tipped more in the direction of like the creepy, crazy house stuff that was going on, and kind of less in scenes of, the characters just talking about like the before time, like before Scarlet left and before all this other stuff, and like all the relationship kind of stuff. Some of that was important, like for you to get emotionally invested in the characters, but I don't think it needed to be as much in there. And I kind of wish that they had done more with the house, or they had gone into the house earlier. Because once you get in the house, like the sequences inside the house are really, really vividly described, and some of the imagery is like legit scary. Now, I don't think that I would call this book overly scary as a whole, but some of the imagery is kind of like disturbing in a very cosmic horror sort of way. Like it's sort of like The Haunting of Hill House, like more the Netflix series than the novel I'm talking about, where it's just kind of like more about the character stuff, and then like the paranormal or the weird shit is kind of like in the background or like around the margins. And it kind of reminded me, I don't know if I'd go so far in this direction, but it's a little bit like Silent Hill. I don't know if it's just a little bit, you know what I mean? And it's just kind of like all mashed up together with sort of like tripping on a low dose of acid type of thing. Because like while they're inside the house, essentially time becomes meaningless, and the characters kind of go through things where they seemingly die and then like return to life in a different spot in the mansion with little to no memory of what happened or how long they've been in there and things like that. So the mansion is sort of like purgatorial in that sense, I guess. But as I mentioned, I kind of wish that more of the house's history and construction and like its essence had been explained. And I kind of wish that we'd gone a little bit more into what the Crow Corporation was, how they knew about the house, why they offered this particular contest, why they wanted people to go in there, like some of the people that they found when they were in there, like what was that about? I kind of wish there had been more of that. But, to be fair, the characters in the novel, like from their point of view, wouldn't have known what the fuck was up with this place, so maybe it was better to leave it mysterious because you're seeing things from their perspective and they didn't know anything about the house. They were just kind of experiencing it as they experienced it. So overall, I found this like a really enjoyable read. Now, I will note that it took me way longer than usual to get through it. I don't know if that was necessarily because it was really long or I wasn't into it or something like that. I think it was more because I was kind of obligated to read it like on my phone, like in short chunks over, a week or so of like lunch hours from work. So that's not really conducive to total immersion in the story when you're just reading things like on a tiny phone, like in hour-long chunks. And I couldn't really like fully devote like a day to it or anything like that. I will say I really, really like the descriptions of the house and the sort of like nightmarish journey of the characters as they explored it. And I really did like appreciate the time that was spent building up the characters' backstories. And, each of them had their own arc and their own problems, and I thought that was good. But that said, I kind of wish the protagonist had gone into the house earlier, like I said, and more had been revealed about the house's true nature maybe, and about what the Crow Corporation's deal was. I also would have liked Vincent Velidex, the magician, to have factored into the story more throughout. Like, it would have been cool, like, in the first half of the book, like, if we had maybe seen, like, a few scenes from his point of view. But maybe, I don't know, maybe Patrick Delaney, the author, maybe he wanted it to be like, hey, surprise, like, the guy just turns up in the middle, even though he'd just been mentioned, like, beforehand, so it was more like a surprise. So I guess I can kind of see that as well. But, he was really interesting. He was maybe, I really liked Scarlet, the main character, but I think Victor Velidex was probably, like, the most interesting character, and I kind of wanted to know more about him, like what his deal was, because you didn't really find out much about his past or why he turned up at this particular time or anything like. You do kind of find out, but it just didn't seem like enough. The characters, like I mentioned, did also read significantly younger than people in their late 20s, but really, like I said, that didn't really bother me all that much. They were all kind of like horror nerds and stuff like that, which I'm that too, so it's really didn't read as all that weird to me. There was also kind of like this I really liked this sort of small town wistfulness vibe, like to them and like to the characters and to the story, because they were just like the characters, I feel like were just beginning to realize that all of these big aspirations that they had as teenagers and young adults were probably never going to come to pass, and life wasn't like working out the way that they wanted. And I thought that gave the story like a little bit of depth in that regard. So if you like sort of like Lovecraftian type stories, because this does have like a Lovecraftian bent to it, and if you're willing to kind of be patient with a book that is very intensely character focused and relationship focused rather than maybe horror focused for the first large portion of the story, like until they actually go into the house, then, you know, it's free on Kindle Unlimited. If you have a subscription, like, you know, maybe give it a whirl. It was actually a fantastic story concept. I really liked the idea. And even though it didn't quite live up to its sort of like amazing premise, I still had a really good time with it, and I was pretty satisfied with the way that it ended. Now, there is actually a second book, which I think is called Silver's Hollow, and it's not super long. It's only like, it's more like novella length, and it's sort of set in the same universe as this, I think, but I don't think it's like a sequel or anything. Like, at least I haven't read it, but I went and looked at like the description, and it doesn't look like the same characters or anything like that. But I just thought I would mention it because Silver's Hollow is another town that factors into this book. So I guess he's doing like an extended mythos type with these same towns, where he's setting all these stories in the same towns. But he's written some other books too, but I just thought I would mention that one. I don't think it's a sequel. Like I said, it didn't sound like it, but apparently it's kind of set in the same universe or the same town or something like that. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror book review. Please like, share, and comment if you enjoy this content, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.